What does it really mean to own something in this digital age? And how do we protect that ownership when AI is reshaping our world at breakneck speed? Well, in today's episode, I'm joined by Ian Rogers, Chief Experience Officer at Ledger. And together, we're going to try and unpack the future of digital asset security, self-custody, and what it takes to navigate the Web3 revolution and do it with confidence. From securing 20% of the world's crypto to rethinking what it means to truly control your digital identity, Ledger has built much more than just a hardware wallet. It's actually helping shape the foundation of digital freedom. So Ian's going to share his perspective on why we're living through the digitalization of all value and what that actually means for individuals and institutions alike. And why, in a world powered by AI, uncompromising security isn't optional, it's a necessity. So how do we ensure that our digital lives are as protected and sovereign as our physical ones? Well, let's find out by getting Ian onto the podcast now. So thank you for joining me on the podcast today. For everyone listening, can you just tell them a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Ian Rogers. I'm currently what we call the Chief Experience Officer at a Paris-based company called Ledger. At Ledger, we have the number one security solution for things like cryptocurrency, but also your logins. You know, we live in a world where digital security is important, and that's more important every day, and we make the best solution for that. Previously, I was the Chief Digital Officer at LVMH, and prior to that, I spent 20 years in digital music, and the last two things I worked on there were Beats Music and Apple Music. And, you know, some people might be familiar with an MP3 player called Winamp that we worked on in the 90s.
Oh, man, Winamp, that takes me back. I absolutely love that. Oh, wow.
You know, there's only two responses when you mention Winamp. It's either just like a glazed over, what are you talking about? That, I don't know. Or there's like, wait, Winamp? You know, so yeah, that's why I mention it.
Oh, I love it, man. And I suspect we will have people, passionate members of your community tuning in. But for those people that are hearing about Ledger for the first time, wanting to learn more about it, can you just introduce them to Ledger and also what problem that it solves and why it is such a critical piece of software or critical piece of that Web3 ecosystem?
Yeah, with pleasure. I mean, you know, I ended up here, you know, because I'm somebody who was passionate about the early internet, but also I feel like the internet we got was not quite the internet that we dreamed of, right? I think we all feel that in many ways. And that's really what drew me to crypto as well. I think, you know, we've already lived through this once in humanity digitization of all information. And now we are living through a once in humanity digitization of all value. And I see these as kind of, you know, separate but related trajectories. You know, we're increasingly living digital lives, whether we like it or not. I think we have to, admit that that's true. And of course, we'll have digital value in our digital lives. I mean, we do. We use, you know, Apple Pay and Google Pay, and we tap our credit cards, and, you know, you know, lots of, places where we buy things don't take cash. And this is the world that we live in. But really, this is not just, you know, digital money. It's actually, you know, it's you know, kind of digitization of again, all value. And one of those things of value is your identity. You know, you're in possession of a passport or a driver's license, and it's those things that give you the ability to move across borders. You know, I had more mobility than most of my friends during COVID because I was in possession of a US passport and a French visa, right? And therefore I could move borders more easily than a lot of my friends. It's, you know, we forget that, you know, that ownership also, equals identity. And, you know, and increasingly these kinds of things are digital, whether it's a title or a deed or a mortgage or, you know, an option, or there are lots of things that, you know, that will be digitized in this digitization of all value. But if that's the case, you must have security. You know, there's not an option to have a digital thing that you could lose and then, you know, have that thing be easy to lose, right? It needs to be, you know, security needs to be the default. And, you know, unfortunately that hasn't been the case. We've kind of, you know, lived in this world where we went from, you know, kind of a username and password that gave us access to a bunch of websites to log in with Google, log in with iCloud, log in with, Facebook, et cetera. And, now all of our kind of ownership is in the hands of these third parties. Well, again, I don't think that's the internet that we asked for, as users of the internet. So giving people the ability to securely own their own digital private property is, fundamentally what we're all about, and the leading solution in doing. Now, what we do practically speaking is we make really beautiful pieces of hardware. We're one of our, partners in the business is Tony Fadell, who invented the iPod, co-invented the iPhone, created the company Nest. And he is, uncompromising when it comes to usability, beautiful industrial design, and ease of use for the consumer. And, we're a 10-year-old company that has the best security experts and cryptographers in the world that are uncompromising on security. So what you get with Ledger is the best of both of those worlds, which is like a beautiful, easy to use device featuring the same technology that's in your passport or your credit card in terms of protecting digital value, but with a really easy to use package. So you can literally walk into a Best Buy store in the US or a Boulanger in France and buy the device and go home and buy your first Bitcoin, if it's what you'd like to do. So, that's what the company has been doing for the past 10 years. And, really we're doing it better than ever now that we have these beautiful new devices, Ledger Flex and Ledger Stacks, and, more services than ever. So people can do whatever it is they would like to do with their digital value.
And I read that you previously described this moment that we're in right now as the digitization of all value, which is incredibly cool. But so how does Ledger fit into this transformation? And why do you think now is such a pivotal time for both security and indeed ownership?
Well, I mean, so Ledger is, again, as I said, that, security is paramount if you have digital value. So, I loved, if again, going back to the Winnet metaphor, like, that was, 1998, 99 for me. And, if you look at the growth of the world of digital value now compared to the growth of the internet, we're kind of in that 2001, 2002 time period when there's kind of 500 million users, and the path to 1 billion users is pretty clear. But also, if you remember back in those days, the user experience of the internet was not great. A lot of it was dial-up modems. Broadband was not, evenly distributed, to say the least. And there was just a lot of work to do. And, I think we're really kind of in that same moment when it comes to, digital ownership. There are, there's definitely a lot of, whether it's, BlackRock or, other talking heads on CNBC, there's a lot of awareness around digital assets. And now we have these very simple user interfaces called ETFs to buy things like Bitcoin and Ethereum. But the reality is, that's not what this was, created for. Bitcoin and blockchains were created to make permissionless money. Money that you can actually, hold on to without counterparty risk. And have, ownership of your own personal digital private property. So to do that, you really need both self-custody and security. And Ledger is the only company that really provides, both of those things in a good package. So I think that's why, at this moment in time, when, like I said, there's about 500,000 users in the world of crypto and the path to 1 billion is clear, yet, if you really sort of look into and get your head around what is it we're talking about, you end up, with this refrain, which is, if not self-custody, meaning, you hold your private property in your own private safe, then why crypto? What's the difference between holding this digital money versus having a PayPal account or using a Visa card? And, that's where what Ledger gives you is something that is fundamentally different than what you could have with a bank account, with a PayPal account, with a credit card. You are actually getting a secure digital safe for your personal private property. And that is, it's actually quite profound. And it goes all the way to owning your own preferences and owning your own identity. We have, on Ledger, there's an application called Security Key, which will allow you to secure your Google account or your X account or, any, of your logins that use it as a hardware 2FA. But instead of storing that with iCloud or 1Password, which is just another way of, kind of offloading that to, another centralized honeypot, you're actually, keeping that in your possession. Another way to look at this is, again, from a technology perspective, there's a technology in Ledger devices. It's called smart card technology. It's a secure element that is, hardened and, meant to be secure. Well, it's the same technology that's in your credit card and your passport. The difference is that the smart card in your credit card protects the secrets of the bank, and the one that's in your passport protects the secrets of the government, and the one that's in your ledger protects your secrets, which I think, in the world that we're living in is important. One more thing about just this moment in time, we're all using AI, more and more and more. Many of us, myself included, are using AI, throughout the day in many parts of our lives, but you can't, live in this kind of agentic AI future that we're all imagining without having, blockchains and digital ownership and, secure, digital private property. Blockchains deliver digital abundance, but blockchains deliver digital scarcity, and they also deliver proof. Using cryptography, I could prove to you that this is indeed me talking and this is my voice coming out of this microphone. And if somebody edits that edit could be, recorded as proof. And if, I think, many of us that are looking at AI every day are seeing clearly that notion of provenance, was this created by a human? Was this created by AI? Can I know that this really was the source? I'm working with an author right now who's writing something they feel is important, and they want to inscribe that thing onto the blockchain because they're imagining that people will refer to it, 10 years from now, 25 years from now, 50 years from now, and even longer. And they want to have, proof that these were indeed the words that they wrote on this day. And, if you're thinking more about it, an AI future, you realize that, yes, that will be important. That provenance will be important. Proof and ownership will be important. So I think that it's, the other side of the coin from artificial intelligence. Like if you're interested in artificial intelligence, then you are also interested in, provenance, proof, and these sorts of things.
And this feels like a great moment to maybe introduce listeners to some of those Ledger devices that you mentioned a moment ago, and maybe help them understand why Ledger's approach to securing digital assets are different from traditional storage or custodial methods, especially in an age where AI and cyber threats, like you mentioned, are evolving rapidly. So could you expand on some of those devices and the kind of value that they bring and how they work?
Yeah, I'll try. Let me at least attempt to take the opportunity to help users, help your listeners understand how these devices work a bit too, because I think it's a bit mysterious, but I think for at least some of your listeners, I can get them over the hump of understanding how it works. You have these things called wallets, and there are software wallets and there are hardware wallets like Ledger. We have a piece of software called Ledger Live, which is our wallet. But your value doesn't actually live inside the wallet. Now that's the mental model that we have from the world that we've grown up in. But what actually lives inside the wallet is the proof that you are the owner of that value. And the value actually lives out there on the blockchain. So the way to think about it, and let's assume that you have a little bit of Bitcoin. You've got, 0.01 Bitcoin or something. What you really have is you have a private key that proves you are the owner of that value out there on the blockchain. So you have that value because somebody has given it to you. You probably paid them for it, and they transferred that value to your wallet. When they did, they inserted a record on the blockchain that said, this 0.01 Bitcoin has been transferred from, someone else's wallet to your wallet. And then what you have is the proof that you are the owner of that value. Now, I've told you enough for you to appreciate that proof is everything. Because if someone else has that proof, then they have your value. So there are some situations like when you're on exchange, when you don't have that proof at all. What you have is you have a log into the exchange and they have put in their kind of spreadsheet, like you have this much value, but you're taking their word for it, that they are going to give you that value back when you ask for it. Right. And, there are definitely some exchanges out there which I trust, although, not very many. And we've seen these exchanges go the wrong way before, whether that's, FTX, or, even banks, like, seeing SVB go illiquid was not something that I thought would happen, in my lifetime, right? So there's always counterparty risk when you're in that sort of a situation. Or maybe you have your value in a software wallet. And a software only wallet is only as secure as your computer or your phone. And we know these aren't very secure at all. If somebody wants to own the value that's on your computer or your phone, they can quite easily. Unfortunately, because of the line of business that I'm in, I hear these stories every day. But the reality is that, that's not what your phone or your computer were built for. I always use the example, if I gave you the task of protecting $1 billion in gold bars, and, you started working on the building, and then I came to you and I said, oh, and by the way, I'm going to put, a nightclub and a grocery store and a kindergarten in that same building. You'd probably say, hey man, get a second building, right? But that's the reality. Your computer and your phone are very good at many things, but protecting value is not what they were designed for and not what they were good at. They're built for performance. They're built for, utility. They're not built for security. So, a ledger device is built for security. Like I said, it has a secure element chip in it. And it uses that in a very special way that I'll describe in a second. But, basically in that chip lives your private key so that no one else can get it. And that's what they do. And then the challenge then is doing that in kind of a usable form factor, because you're really using it as a signing device, the same way you would use, a second factor of login. And when you want to do something with your crypto, whether that's, buy some, sell, send some, stake some, swap some, buy an NFT, interact with the blockchain in some way, you're going to set up that transaction on your phone or your computer, but then you're going to approve that transaction on your device. And by doing that, you're going to look at it on a screen that's secure, and that's how you know it's secure. So one last thing in this explanation, in order to be secure, you need three things. You need to generate that private key in and store that private key in a secure element. Now, why generate it there? Because you've got some special features and functionalities, such as like onboard entropy, to make sure that you're really generating a sufficiently random thing. Now, I'm getting into cryptography, but it's important that, the cryptography works well. Cryptography is incredible, but only if it, is done well. So that's why it's important. You need that to be, in that secure element, difficult to get to, offline, not available to attackers on the internet, etc. You need to be sure that it stays there when you do the transaction. In other words, that private key can't come out of the wallet and into your phone, or out of the wallet and into, say, a general purpose MCU. Some pieces of hardware have like, a chip that's like the same chip that would be in the remote control of your television, that they do the computation in, so they might store it in a secure enclave, but then they do the transactions in the clear. That's also not secure. And the third thing is you need to be able to verify that transaction on the secure screen with your eyeballs, meaning that, the screen you are looking at doesn't have some other chip or some other piece of software that's attackable between what you're seeing and what you're signing, that it's actually that secure chip that's powering the screen. So I apologize, that's a bit technical, but that's actually what makes Ledger distinct. Ledger is the only piece of hardware that, that checks all of those boxes in terms of security. And we've been really uncompromising when it comes to that. And that's why we're the leader here, and there have been many cycles in crypto, and every single time, very smart people come up with very rational reasons that they need to compromise on either security, self-custody, or both. And those reasons are always wrong. In the end, it hurts people. You end up with, the kinds of things that we had with FTX, or, the kind of hack that just happened to Bybit. And it's worth noting that we also have an enterprise product. And for example, if Bybit had been using Ledger's enterprise product when they were just hacked for, $1.4 billion by the North Korean government, that particular attack that they suffered would not have been possible. And so that's, this is really, the types of problems that we're focused on and that we provide for both consumers and enterprise.
Yeah, you explained that perfectly. And if there is anybody listening with crypto sitting on an exchange, I'll feel compelled to say, go Google, not your wallet, not your coins, and maybe change your ways there. And I also want to highlight the scale of what you're doing here. I mean, some stats here, over 6 million devices sold and 20% of the world's crypto is secured by Ledger. What have you learned about what users really need when it comes to managing their digital wealth as a leader in this space?
Well, I think, the first thing is, we do have, as you said, that sort of, 5 million plus users that represent 20% of the market cap. Yeah. So, the way that people find themselves to Ledger is through education. They usually start on exchange, as you just said, and then they get a little more value. They get a little more educated. They become more interested in self custody and security, and they get a ledger. So that's why we have, that cohort of people who, are very well educated and kind of understand, what they're doing deeply, because really, the magic here is digital ownership. But if digital ownership, then you need security. And that doesn't, that doesn't matter if that's on the enterprise side or on the consumer side. Like if you have, ownership of something value that you could lose, a lot easier to steal, 1.4 billion in, digital money than it is gold bars, right? Then, digital security is a must. So that's the first principle, is just really not compromising on security or self-custody is step one. But, the much more difficult thing to do, and this is where it is akin to the growth of the internet, bringing great user experience around that is very difficult. It's not often that you get more security and better usability, right? And so, we've managed to add lots of services, to Ledger Live so that people can buy, they can swap, they can stake and earn yield. We have a credit card so that they can spend, and we have, just tons of services built in, whether that's, tax services, NFT services, et cetera. We have lots built in so people can very easily do more with their, with their digital assets than ever. So that's been a big part of it. But also I think that, that enterprise side of it has been a big push for us too. We just launched a product called Ledger Enterprise Trade Link. And what that does, it allows, asset managers, or wealth managers to basically trade off exchange. So, they have a relationship with an exchange. They have proof of funds. And they can, so they're really getting the services they want without, giving up custody of their value. And so really just, adding in, all of these features is what's, been the most crucial. I think also for us though, is that, this is a new world. And there are pioneers in this world, and, being close to those pioneers and, understanding, what they want and need, and, trying to stay with them. But I think that this company is really akin to, we're less like, say Yahoo or Google in the early days of the internet, and more like a Cisco, where we are, we're quite agnostic. Regardless of what kind of digital assets you hold, you probably know in what ledger. And what we're building is, quite horizontal. So we want to build lots of vertical services on top of that platform. But we really, want to be, the platform and the secure operating system, for this emerging digital asset market.
And if there are people interested in this space, but they do find some of the technical aspects daunting, I think it's so important that we highlight today that education is clearly a part of Ledger's mission here, from everything from Ledger Academy to Quest and your new Web3 game. Can you just tell the listeners a little bit about that and how you're helping more people safely enter and navigate this space? Because it's kudos to you and the work you're doing here.
No, thank you very much. I mean, it is true. It's like, there's a lot to learn here. There are a lot of pitfalls. So as you said, we have, Ledger Academy, which is one of the top resources for learning about crypto, on the internet. So it's on ledger.com, and if you just search Ledger Academy, you'll find it. As you said, we have, these quests, which are kind of learn and earn games, that we've made that are, that communities do to help make their community members, more educated, and make sure that people aren't, too many people find their way to Ledger the hard way. they lose some value and then they go, I guess I need a ledger, right? Our goal is just to get people, in long before that so that people, and by the way, this goes for enterprises as well. I mean, the Bybit example I just gave is, these are not small companies that also learn the hard way. We want people to come in, before there's been some sort of crisis, of course. So, and like I said, education is just really highly leveraged for us because educated people become ledger customers. The challenge is, getting people earlier in the cycle. But it's certainly possible. There are really great resources out there. Ledger Academy is one of them, but, lots of great people and podcasts, that to teach all different aspects of it. We really try to focus on the security and self-custody side of it. But there are great places to learn out there for pretty much anything you want to know. Of course, it's hard to know who to trust out there, but, do your own research, as we always say.
Yeah, 100%. And I'd love to also talk about Ledger Enterprise. How are institutions thinking differently about digital asset custody, and what role does Ledger play in that shift as well? Because you're not just focused on everyday users. Ledger Enterprise is proof of that, right?
Yeah, we've had Ledger Enterprise for more than 5 years now, maybe more than 6 if I do the math right. And that's, especially about this cycle, this is, enterprise is more and more important. I mean, if you go back to 2021, there was a lot of consumer buzz around crypto, both as an asset class, but also things like NFTs, et cetera. In this cycle, you've got, big players like BlackRock in the game, and the ETFs are more than a year old. And, institutions, I think in many ways, institutions are taking advantage of the fact that retail customers have not come back in droves yet to kind of, to really like learn about this and get in the game before the retail customer comes back in earnest. So protecting that value on the enterprise side is just as important. I mean, if you are a customer who has an exchange account, then you should be asking, what is that exchange using to protect my crypto? And how do I know that what happened to Bybit, or Mt. Gox or so many other people in the middle doesn't happen to them? So that's what we do. Is we are a technology provider to provide security to enterprises. Our retail product has, excellent security. The thing that you need if you are an organization or an enterprise is you need governance. You can't have, the kind of the keys to recover the private key sitting with your most trustworthy IT person. You need to have a true enterprise grade, security solution for your digital assets. And what Ledger Enterprise does is it adds this governance layer that is really infinitely configurable for the organization, so that an individual in the organization might have the ability to, spend up to say $5,000, but above that you need 2 of 3 signatures, and above another number you need 3 of 5, and one of them must be the CFO, and that's all configurable by the organization. Now, we've just heard the horror stories, for years of, a startup in the crypto space that, they have all of their value, on a ledger, but, they don't have governance, and something happens to that individual, or, they're now that individual is responsible for the treasury of the business. And that doesn't make sense. No sane business would operate that way. So Ledger Enterprise is the solution for that. And then, like I said, we have products on top of that. In addition to the different kinds of coin support and staking to earn yield and these sorts of things, like TradeLink, which allow you to trade off exchange, without, taking custody risk. And that's a super important, in this emerging space, and, a great product that has a lot of uptake from institutions now.
And finally, as we look ahead, what's next for Ledger, especially in a world where crypto, NFTs, and digital identity are all things that are becoming mainstream now? So what does responsible digital freedom look like in practice? Because I think this is a topic we're going to be hearing more and more about in the months and years ahead.
I feel super lucky to work at a company that's been around for 10 years in an emerging space and has been saying the same thing for 10 years. And especially in the world of crypto, where, I think, people know that it's been up and down and a moving target. Ledger has been this bellwether that has had the same mission from day one, which is, we believe in, we believe that we're going to have more, where we will have digital value in our digital lives increasingly. And if that's the case, then security is important. And then we offer that, security on both the retail side and the enterprise side. And then we just want to increase the number of things that you can do, as well as the ease of use in doing it. So we just continue to introduce, products and services literally week after week after week. We have two beautiful new pieces of hardware, Ledger Stacks and Ledger Flex, and we have a great hardware roadmap coming for the future. We have Ledger Live. Inside of Ledger Live, we're always adding services to do whatever you'd like to do: buy, swap, earn yield, credit card for spending, etc. And we're adding things, like I said, literally every single week, whether it's support for a new service or support for a new blockchain, et cetera. And also we want to help you with anything that helps you with your security hygiene overall. So whether that's security key or Ledger Recover, which makes it, easy to recover your accounts in the case of a disaster. Many people who needed that during the LA fires as an example for Ledger Recover. And we have, other ways that are coming, of things that are, they're ways that we're just helping you manage your digital security. So I mentioned security key earlier. That's another one, which is hardware two-factor auth. So, again, that's nothing to do with crypto. It's, I use it even for my login.gov account. My US citizen account is protected with two-factor authentication using my Ledger, not Google Authenticator, not a cell number that could be SIM swapped. It's the most secure piece of hardware on the planet to protect your critical logins.
The Web3 space, and indeed entire pace of technological change, it's moving faster than ever. And I think there's also somewhat of a realization that it might never move this slow again. So as a result, we find ourselves in this state of continuous learning. And as someone right in the eye of the storm here, I've got to ask, how do you keep up to speed with everything? How do you self-educate? Any tips or advice you can offer around that, or what you do to keep up to speed?
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I really, I think lifelong learning is, I don't know, it's a reason for being on some level. It's what makes me excited about all of this. And the reason I love doing this job is because these concepts are challenging, and to be able to get my head around them and then be able to explain them to others, like Richard Feynman said, if you can't explain it to others, then you don't know the material well enough yourself. So I'm always trying to do that and to keep up. I think, a few things. First of all, I just have brilliant people around me. That's the most important thing. I've always said that, for every job, you don't follow the title or, even the sector, you follow a mentor. And I've been lucky. My career is a history of great mentors. Also, I think just having young people around you, whether it's your kids or the younger people that you work with, and really, paying attention to what are they doing? What are they following? That it teaches you more than, more than you can learn from any one application, right? You have the opportunity to go deep with other people, specifically on crypto and also AI. I have one source that I pay attention to every single day, and it's the same source. There's a guy named Nathaniel Whittemore. He goes by NLW, and he has two podcasts. One is called the Breakdown. If you search crypto breakdown, you'll find it. And another one is called AI Daily News. And they are daily, news programs, which, keep me on top of what's going on, with macroeconomics and Bitcoin and crypto. But also, I've never, I studied computer science and graduated in 1994. So I've been, paying attention to, new developments and innovations, for as long as I can remember. I've never seen anything move as quickly as what's going on in the AI space right now, where, the leaps and bounds are, jaw dropping on a, at least monthly and often weekly basis. So for me, having, a good news source on things like that, somebody I can really trust, where I don't need to listen to, 90 minutes of somebody speculating on something, but I'm actually getting, kind of a good update. And then, that's important. I think the final thing, and this is maybe the most important, is you don't know unless you do. When I was working at LVMH and I would have an LVMH executive or CEO say to me, like, something they'd read about Snapchat in the Wall Street Journal, I would say, do you have Snapchat? And they'd say, oh, no, it's not for me. And I'd say, tell you what, install Snapchat, come talk to me in a week, because you're not going to learn anything about it by reading about it in the news. First of all, that news is 6 months old. And second of all, you don't know what's hype and what isn't unless you get your hands on it. If you go back 11 years ago when voice was, all the rage, I would say to people, have you ever used voice? I mean, I don't know. As far as I can tell, Siri still doesn't work. Now, when I use voice with ChatGPT, that works, right? And this is the nuance that you only get by like using these new tools, seeing how they work. I mean, I sat down and tried to vibe code an app with my, 10-year-old on Friday night. And, I now have a much better sense of what people mean when they say vibe coding. And I also know that there are many things that you can do, and there are many things that are still extremely difficult to do. So, I think that, it's all of the above, paying attention and learning by doing. But I think for me, it's like, I'm a much better participant than I am a spectator. I don't watch sports. I don't watch TV. I don't watch movies. I prefer to participate in things. And I think maybe that's the biggest one for me.
Love that. Fantastic advice. And if there is anybody listening inspired by what they heard today, especially because we've put it in a language that everyone can understand, maybe they want to read more about the devices, some of the education things we talked about there, the Ledger Academy to Quest and the new Web3 game, where's the best starting point for everything?
I mean, ledger.com is a great starting point, but I'd also really encourage people to go to our YouTube channel. Ledger YouTube has a lot of great things that are quite digestible. In particular, there's a little film that we made called The Road to Ledger Stacks. If you search that on YouTube, you'll find it. And even if you don't care anything about crypto, I promise you'll love the story. It's a little 20-minute, I call it a podumentary, that tells the story of building the world's first curved e-ink display with Tony Fadell. It's one of the probably, the single greatest adventure I've ever been on in my life. And it's told in 20 minutes there. And that's a great place to start. You'll get a sense of, who we are. And then if you want to deep dive, there's lots of videos on Ledger's YouTube channel that you can, dive into and see more about who we are and what we do and why we do it.
Love that. Well, I will add links, and I'll try and add that into the blog post that will accompany this episode as well. So many big talking points. If we have anybody that's new to this space, I'd love for them to contact me directly, let me know what they thought. And I'd also love to stay in touch with you, continue another conversation later on in the year, see how things are evolving. But just thank you for shining a light on this today.
I'd be really happy to. Thank you for giving me a chance, and thank you to your listeners for listening.
So a huge thank you to Ian for helping us rethink digital ownership and do it through a sharper lens. Because as AI accelerates and our lives move even further online, conversations like this remind us that convenience should never come at the cost of control. Ledger's message is clear: your assets, your identities, your keys, your responsibility. But with the right tools and a little education, that responsibility becomes empowerment. Whether you're minting NFTs, building a DAO, or simply curious about how to secure your first Bitcoin, the road to digital freedom starts with understanding how to keep what's yours, yours. So what's your take on digital self-custody in a hyper-connected world? Are we doing enough to prepare for a future where ownership lives on a chain? Let me know. Techblogwriter at outlook.com, LinkedIn, X, Instagram, just at Neil C. Hughes. But keep your questions and thoughts and anything you thought about today's episode coming in, and I'll return again tomorrow with another guest. But thank you for listening as always. I'll speak with you all soon. Bye for now.